everyone, Bob here again from INSYDIUM. So let's have a look at some more new features that will be part of the newest X-Particles early access release out very soon. And today the feature we'll look at is a really exciting one, particle-based dynamics. Let's jump into Cinema 4D and see what all this is about. In this scene we have an X-Particles emitter and it's spitting out these cube particles which have been forced down by a gravity and they're bouncing off this plane. But our scene object, this cube, isn't interacting with any of those X-Particles systems. So how do we do it? Well, now we can with the new X-Particles Dynamics. Let's go to the cube and the tags menu. We'll go to the X-Particles tags and we'll stick on an xpDynamics. And as soon as we do, the cube falls to the ground with the gravity and interacts with that plane collider. And if I dolly in, what you can see is that that dynamics tag has spawned a new particle on each vertex of that cube. And it is those particles which are interacting with the gravity and the collider and forcing the geometry to follow. So if I do go one step further, let's activate this turbulence. You will see that every single X-Particles control object and modifier can now be used to force around and manipulate this cube and make it act dynamically. Not only can the dynamics be used on single objects like this cube, they also work on X-Particles Sprites and Generators. Let's take this cube and make it a child of our XP generator. We'll move the dynamics tag to the generator itself, and let's give the generator our emitter. So now we should start making some dynamic objects from these particles from the emitter. Let's have a look. So that's working nicely, fully dynamic and interacting with our scene. Let's reactivate that turbulence for a more dramatic look. And we have fully X-Particles controllable dynamic cubes. X-Particles Dynamics is also fully compatible with Mograph. Let's take our cube and place it into this cloner, which is set to a grid array. Let's have the dynamic tag active on the cloner itself and hit play, and we have some dynamic cubes. We can go into the dynamics tag. Let's give them a little bit of initial spin. We do that using the angular velocity. Let's just give it some degrees, which will make our clone spin. And let's see what effect it has. And we could also, with it being Mograph, of course, use all of the Mograph effectors. Let's activate this random effector. Start the simulation again, and there we've got some really nice dynamic cubes. Now that we've created our dynamic geometry using particles, we're able to ultimately control and artistically direct those dynamic objects. So in this scene, let's say we want to move these dynamic cubes around using an emitter. Well, we can do that. All we need to do is bring in an emitter to the scene, which is spitting out these particles. And then we need to additionally add an X-Particles dynamic solver. We can do this with constraints, with collisions active. We could do it with particle-to-particle collisions. We can even do it with the fluid PBD solver. In this scene, we have constraints active. So let's hit play. And now I can take my emitter and I can use those particles to push around and move those dynamic cubes created by a Mograph cloner. So ultimate control of our new dynamic objects using the X-Particles system. The new X-Particles Dynamics system is fully integrated with all of the X-Particles dynamic physics solvers. Here we have a fluid effects water scene, creating this really nice choppy water. Let's say we want our cube to become our raft and float around and be moved around by these choppy waves. Well, all we need to do is activate our dynamics tag. So let's enable it, hit play, and see what happens. The cube falls to the surface, creates a splash, and then is moved around by these choppy waves. We've got much more artistic control than that though. If I go to the dynamics tag settings, we can increase the density of our cubes. Let's make it more dense, which means it'll sink. If we resim, this should create a bigger splash. And it'll gradually sink into the water. Let's make it incredibly dense. Let's raise that density way up and see what happens. We should get a much bigger splash. There it is. All that water is displaced and it sinks to the bottom. And then, of course, we can lower that density and have it floating on the surface. So an awful lot of artistic control getting our new dynamic geometry to interact with X-Particles physics solvers like FluidFX. In its default settings, the xpDynamics tag automatically spawns these particles onto your object, and it's these that allow it to become dynamic. However, for more control and more artistic freedom, you're able to assign an emitter to the dynamics tag. Let's highlight the dynamics tag, and what I'll do is drag in this scene emitter into the emitter box. And now nothing much looks like it has changed, but we are able to control these particles through the emitter settings. So what could we do with that? Well, let's give this emitter, we'll go to the extended data tab, to the physical data, and we'll give it 2 fuel. We are then going to give it a tags, X-Particles tags, Explosion FX source tag, and I'm then going to activate this Explosion FX domain in our scene. So now that we have that, if we hit play, we can see that those dynamic particles, which are being used to calculate the dynamic properties of this cube, are also emitting smoke and fire, which is excellent. We could go one step further. Let's just, in the emitter, remove that fuel, and we will use instead a physical modifier with some data mapping. We will set up an action on collision, and now if we hit play, we only get that fire and smoke simulation when the particles collide with the floor. Excellent for those VFX shots. The new X-Particles dynamic system can simulate both rigid and soft bodies. So to get a true rigid body simulation, what you need to do is uncheck update points. This means that the vertices of the object don't follow and deform with that of the dynamic particles. But if we want to change this hard body sim into a soft body sim, what we need to do is update the points, and let's just reduce this rigidity. Let's bring it way down to say 4%, and straight away you'll see we're starting to get some squashy deformation. Now, to get even more control, we need to access the Dynamics Constraints system. So we'll go to the Constraints tab, and let's activate Structure Constraints for this simulation. And in the display, we will show constraints. So let's just resim, and now you can see we've got this floppy constraint system joining those dynamic particles, giving us this soft body sim. Let's just go to the display and take away those constraints so we can see the object fully, and you'll see that we're getting this really incredibly wobbly, soft-bodied cube slopping its way down these stairs. What we're able to do is give it a little bit of internal pressure, as if it was slightly inflated. Let's go to the pressure and just give it an internal pressure of 1. We'll re-simulate, and now it's almost sticking and then gradually making its way down before it flops down to the bottom. And as you can see, all of these options for radius, rigidity, pressure, and volume pressure all have the ability to use a vertex map, so you can isolate exactly where on your geometry you want these various settings. So that is both soft and rigid bodied simulations using the new X-Particles Dynamics system. The new X-Particles Dynamics also works with splines. In this scene, we've got this emitter, and the particles are being forced down and moved around by the turbulence. But of course, the spline is doing absolutely nothing. So let's make it dynamic. We'll go to the object and go to Tags, X-Particles tags, and let's bring in an xpDynamics. It will work off the bat, but the spline is rigid, so we need to make some adjustments. We will go to the tag and let's reduce the rigidity to 0, and we'll add some constraints. And now what we'll see is a dynamic spline, which is falling to the ground and then shuffling around with that turbulence. So what we're also able to do with this is pin it. So if we go to the spline and to the points view, you can see that I have one point selected at the top of the spline, and from this we've made a selection tag. So we're able to pin this spline in place with the XP pin tag. So let's bring that onto the spline. We'll drag in our selection as the pin map, and now if we hit play, you will see that the spline is dynamic. It is holding in place by that one point and is beautifully being moved around by that turbulence and the gravity. Let's go and put that into a spline mesher generator, which will create a nice mesh from that spline. Let's hide the spline. And now we have this fantastic dynamic piece of geometry which is moving around with our X-Particles modifiers. You can of course use multiple splines in your scene, and if you set them up with dynamics, they won't intersect. Here we have 6 splines being meshed with one spline mesher, so very simple to set up, and you can see we've got this fantastic wrapping around of these tendrils. These splines will also interact with scene objects as well. Let's bring in a sphere. And we'll move this sphere along, and you'll see that they'll interact and bounce off that scene geometry without intersecting, wrapping around each other and creating this fantastic looking scene. Let's just get rid of that sphere. We could also control these with X-Particles as well. So I'll just switch off that turbulence so these hang towards the floor, and we'll activate this emitter, and you'll see that where the particles hit the tentacles, it's pushing them around the place and causing them to move around without any intersections. So that is Spline Dynamics using the brand new X-Particles Dynamics system. So very cool stuff, particle-based dynamics. To find out exactly when this new release of X-Particles is out, then subscribe to INSYDIUM on our YouTube channel. That way you'll get all the videos as soon as they're released, and you can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all that social media stuff. Okay, until next time, I'll see you later.